So in this video, we're going to look at the plot calculator that we previously built as command line interface, but as a GUI. So my main's pretty simple. I import my form. I create an instance of that class. So now I have my form object, and then I start it. So part of what I do over in the form is I again create my TK app. I set the title. I set the icon. Right now I'm letting the app shrink wrap itself basically. I have two variables, the var paper and var ink, that I am going to watch to see which paper did they choose and which ink did they choose, and I'm setting the defaults to 1, whoever 1 is. I have a dictionary that kind of just puts all the paper and ink into one thing, what the values are on the radio button and what their costs are, and that. I've changed this a little bit in terms of making these methods internal. And so I'm going to make frames, make my widgets, and then lay out my widgets. So here I am making my frames. So I have 3 frames. And so I have a left, a middle, and a right. So I have a snagit of this. So this would be my left frame where I have the radio buttons for paper. I need to separate them in their own frame so that they toggle on and off correctly. If I put all these widgets into one frame, then they're considered to be one set. But I need a set for paper and I need a set for ink. So I put them in separate frames. I even put them on separate sides of the GUI. So I will put these radio buttons in my left frame for paper. I will put the ink radio buttons in my right frame for ink, and in the middle I will do a little I'll have a frame, but I'll do a little grid option there to lay out the controls in that. And so I already want to change things, but I'll leave it for now and that. And so I have my frames, my left frame again I put conceptually in row 0. So I'm going to have a concept of a grid inside a grid here. So I have this master grid or parent grid for the whole thing. And I use that grid to lay out the left, middle, and right frame. So there's just one row at this level, and it's column 0, 1, and 2. So I do a northwest, stick it up into the northwest corner, stick this into the northeast corner, and that I might switch that around. If your radio buttons are different length, that might look a little weird. The buttons won't line up. So I might actually change that right now to a west. And this I'm just sticking to the east side, which would be the left, like doing a left justification in that. Well, this would be right, but that's okay. Stick it east or left. I might actually do it west as well for the frame, and I will save that. This is kind of just tucking everything left in that. And so what I do after that is after I set up my base frames, and I need the frames because I need to be able to group the radio buttons together. I'm going to go make my widgets, and the widgets are going to be the labels, the entries, and the button basically. So I have my button here. I'm just going to make my button. These are radio buttons. So I'm making my, these are paper buttons, so regular, heavy, Mylar. I'm leveraging the dictionary to get whatever value for the radio button, 1, 2, 3. I'm also hooking in the variable to say this is the variable that I want you to update when you change. I have my ink radio buttons, line, polygon, ortho, and I'm putting them into the right frame, right? Because you need to use the frame to group them so they turn off and on properly. I'm extracting basically the 1, 2, 3 out of the dictionary here. That's what that mess is. And I'm also setting to, when you change, update the tkinter binding variable var ink. I have my label and my entry, so these are sort of usually paired together because I need one for width, height, and plots, so they're kind of paired together. So I just make the label, make the entry, make the label, make the entry, make the label, make the entry, and then I have a button and a cost and that sort of thing. And so I'm going to This will be the name of the button, and this is where I kind of register someone clicking on the button to run my method down below, my function down below called calculate costs. And this label is just going to be used so I can dump that value after my calculation into this label so people can see how much it's going to cost. I might adjust where that's laid out. Right now it's look like it's over too far, but in that. And then layout widgets gets called. So after I make the widgets, I go and lay them out. And so this is what I've done here is inside the frame that has the radio buttons, I'm using a single column grid with 3 rows to lay out the radio buttons. So I'm kind of like having a grid inside a grid. And I'm doing the same thing for the paper, grid inside a grid. I have a picture of this in the lab that might help explain what's going on. And then here I'm in the middle frame labeling, setting out. So for row 1, I'm going to have my label on the left and the entry on the right. So using column 0 and 1 to do that. And I repeat that process, but a row down for the height. Again, move down a row, repeat the process for the number of plots. Move down a row and put in the button. And then move down a row, and this is in column 2, so I'm going to change this. We'll run it as is. I think I'll come back here and change this to 1. So let's run this and see what happens. Right, the big thing is that these are not being affected, that these are running independently, and I do that by separating them into a frame. Right now this label is out a column. I actually wanted to tuck it down under here. In that. So I'm going to close this and I'll change this to 1, save it, run it again, see if that changes. Now that's tucked in and lined up with the entry boxes. I like that a little bit better. And so here's if we don't put anything in, we get a message because it couldn't convert blank to a number. So I'll put some numbers in, 20, 30, 20. I'll set regular line, and we'll take a look at the cost, and I can calculate the cost, switch it to heavy, switch it to Mylar. What if it was polygon? It should be increasing all the time because these get more expensive as I go down. And so that's a very different end user experience compared to the command line interface one that we built before. But one is just to go over the frames. Sometimes you have to play around with how you lay them out to get them to look exactly the way you want. And so one is to have this set of buttons separate it from this other set. We have to put them on a different frame. There's also the concept of I have a grid that lays out these 3 big chunks of the interface. These buttons, all of these controls, and then these buttons are in separate zones. But within this zone, I have a grid that's 1 column wide but 3 rows, 1 column wide but 3 rows. And so it's like a grid inside a grid. And I do the same thing in here. There's a parent grid, and inside row 0, column 1, I have another grid, and to organize the labels and the entries in there. The one thing about the grid thing is probably to draw it out, and again in the lab I have a little bit of a graphic color coded to help you visualize how this is laid out in that. But that's all I wanted to show you in this demo, so that's it for now.